John Miller sat at his desk, staring at the endless string of emails flooding his inbox. His head throbbed from the stress, but he couldn't bring himself to care anymore. For months, he had been battling a storm that seemed to have no end. An emotional war at home, a relentless pressure at work, and an overwhelming sense of being stuck in the middle of it all. The breakup with Rachel was still fresh, leaving a hollow ache in his chest. Her words haunted him. "You've lost yourself, John. You're drowning in your own misery, and I can't save you anymore." He had never felt so alone. Each evening he returned to an apartment that was now devoid of warmth, the silence filling the space where laughter once lived. The walls, once adorned with photos and memories, now seemed to close in on him, suffocating in their emptiness. The routines of daily life felt mechanical. Wake up, go to work, deal with meaningless tasks, return to a home that no longer felt like one, and fall into a restless sleep. This cycle repeated itself, dragging him deeper into a pit of despair. John had always been a pragmatic man. He believed in controlling what could be controlled and pushing through life's challenges with grit. But this sense of helplessness, this void, was unlike anything he had ever faced. His usual methods of coping weren't working. He was a man without a compass, drifting through life without direction or purpose. The smallest challenges at work felt like insurmountable obstacles, and the emotional weight of his personal life seemed to crush any sliver of hope he had left. It was on a particularly bad evening, after a draining day at work, that John found himself mindlessly scrolling through his phone. Social media was nothing more than a distraction, a place to escape the real world, if only for a moment. But that night, something caught his eye. An article about Stoicism, of all things. How Stoic philosophy can help you face life's hardest moments, it read. John had never thought much about ancient philosophy. To him, it was just another subject he had skimmed through in college, something distant and irrelevant. But now, in his desperate state, the idea that people centuries ago had found a way to navigate life's challenges piqued his interest. Could these ancient teachings offer him something he had missed? Could they help him regain control? He clicked on the article, reading about Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, and Seneca, men who had faced unimaginable hardships and yet found peace in the chaos. Their teachings were simple, yet profound. Stoicism wasn't about ignoring pain or pretending everything was fine. It was about accepting life's inevitable difficulties and finding strength within. The concept of mastering one's reactions, of focusing only on what was within control, resonated with him. For the first time in months, something clicked inside John. He made a decision. He would give this Stoicism thing a try. It wasn't a grand plan, just a personal experiment. For 1 week, he would adopt Stoic habits, practices that promised to bring clarity, resilience, and a sense of inner peace. He didn't expect miracles, but he needed something to change, anything to break the suffocating cycle he was trapped in. With a newfound sense of determination, John compiled a list of 10 Stoic habits he would incorporate into his daily life. The week ahead felt daunting, but for the first time in a long while, he felt a sliver of hope. Day 1. Morning reflection and journaling. The first day of John's Stoic experiment began with a simple task: journaling. Stoics believed that starting the day with reflection helped align thoughts and actions. Inspired by Marcus Aurelius, John sat at his kitchen table, a blank notebook in front of him. The morning sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting soft shadows across the page. He hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to write. He had never been one to express his feelings on paper. He preferred to keep them buried deep inside, where they wouldn't be seen by anyone, not even himself. But today was different. He had committed to this experiment, and he wasn't going to back out on the first day. Taking a deep breath, John began to write. What can I control today? He scrawled across the page. My actions, my reactions, how I treat others. It was simple, yet as the words took shape, they began to clear some of the mental fog. He continued, reflecting on the day ahead and preparing himself to face whatever challenges it might bring with a calm mind. But as he wrote, doubts crept in. Will this really help? How can writing a few words make any difference when my life is falling apart? His mind rebelled against the simplicity of the practice. Journaling felt like such a small act, a drop in the ocean of his problems. Frustration simmered beneath the surface as he forced himself to keep writing. But deep down, he wondered if this was just another futile attempt at self-improvement. Day 2. Negative visualization. The second habit, premeditatio malorum, or negative visualization, was designed to prepare him for the worst. John was supposed to imagine the challenges and difficulties he might face during the day, mentally preparing himself for anything that could go wrong. The theory was that by anticipating the worst, he would be less shaken when those difficulties actually arose. That morning, as he sat in his car before heading into the office, John closed his eyes and visualized the day ahead. He imagined his boss reprimanding him for missing a deadline. He pictured a tense meeting with his colleagues, and even the possibility of getting stuck in traffic on the way home. The exercise felt uncomfortable, almost as if he was inviting bad luck into his life. Why would anyone want to imagine worst-case scenarios? Despite the discomfort, John pushed through. He reminded himself that Stoicism wasn't about avoiding pain, but learning to endure it with grace. By visualizing the negative, he hoped to lessen its emotional impact. But as he walked into the office that day, he couldn't shake the lingering unease. The practice felt unnatural, and he couldn't help but wonder if he was setting himself up for failure. As the day unfolded, a few of his imagined scenarios did come to pass. His boss was in a foul mood, and a meeting did turn out to be more contentious than expected. Yet instead of feeling overwhelmed, John found himself strangely composed. It wasn't that the situations didn't bother him, they did, but the emotional charge was less intense. By mentally preparing for the worst, he had softened the blow. It wasn't a dramatic shift, but it was something. Day 3. Practicing temperance. The third day brought one of the most challenging habits, temperance. This Stoic principle emphasized moderation and self-control, particularly in emotional reactions. John had never considered himself an overly emotional person, but he knew that frustration, especially at work, often got the better of him. That day, after a tense exchange with a coworker over a delayed project, John felt the familiar surge of anger rising within him. Normally, he would vent his frustration either by snapping at the person or complaining to another colleague. But today, he remembered the Stoic principle of temperance. He took a deep breath, silently reciting to himself, "Control what you can, your reaction. Let go of what you can't." It was far more difficult than he had expected. The anger didn't dissipate right away. It lingered, clawing at his chest, demanding release. His hands itched to type out a passive-aggressive email. He felt the words burning on the tip of his tongue, begging to be said. But instead, John walked away. He left the office, took a walk around the block, and tried to focus on his breathing. By the time he returned, the anger had dulled, but the frustration remained. Practicing temperance felt like bottling up his emotions, and part of him questioned whether this was a healthy way to deal with conflict. Yet, the Stoics had taught that restraint wasn't suppression, but mastery over one's impulses. He reminded himself that this was a learning process, and like all skills, it would take time to develop. Those first 3 days were a whirlwind of doubt, frustration, and small victories. The Stoic habits weren't easy to adopt, and John found himself questioning the effectiveness of each practice. Was he really changing, or was this just another self-improvement trend that would fade away like all the others? The emotional weight of his personal life still bore down on him, and the challenges at work hadn't disappeared. Yet something had shifted. The challenges hadn't lessened, but his reactions to them had changed, if only slightly. There was a tiny flicker of control where there had once been chaos. And for John, in the midst of the storm, that flicker was enough to keep going. Day 4. The dichotomy of control. By the 4th day, John was beginning to feel the weight of the experiment. The early excitement had worn off, replaced by a creeping sense of frustration. He had committed to the Stoic practices, but the tangible changes in his life felt minimal. Yet, as he sat down to reflect in his journal that morning, something inside him shifted. The habit for the day was based on the dichotomy of control, a central Stoic teaching. The idea was simple. Divide the world into 2 categories, things you can control and things you cannot. For John, the implications were profound. In his life, much of his suffering came from trying to control things that were out of his hands. Other people's actions, outcomes at work, his failed relationship with Rachel. He had spent months, if not years, obsessing over factors he had no power to change. That morning, after writing out the situations in his life, John drew 2 columns on a piece of paper. On one side, he listed everything he had no control over: his boss's temperament, the way Rachel had ended their relationship, the weather, the economy, and the opinions of others. On the other side, he listed what he could control: his actions, his words, his attitude, and his decisions. Staring at the page, something clicked. For the first time, he understood what it meant to let go of things beyond his influence. He didn't have to waste energy on situations he couldn't change. He could focus on his reactions and his inner state. That day at work, John had a critical meeting with his boss, Mr. Daniels, known for his harsh critiques. In the past, John would have entered the meeting feeling tense and defensive, trying to predict Mr. Daniels' mood and adjusting his behavior accordingly. But today, he walked in with a different mindset. He couldn't control his boss's words, but he could control his own responses. As expected, the meeting didn't go smoothly. Mr. Daniels criticized John's recent project, pointing out flaws in his work and suggesting that he wasn't fully committed. Normally, such comments would have stung, igniting anger and frustration. But today, John remained calm. He reminded himself, "I cannot control how he reacts. I can only control how I respond." Instead of reacting defensively, he acknowledged the feedback, thanked his boss for his input, and left the meeting without the usual storm of emotions swirling inside him. For the rest of the day, John felt lighter. It wasn't that the criticism didn't affect him. It did. But the emotional toll was far less than usual. He had freed himself from the burden of trying to control things that were out of his reach. And in doing so, he had gained a sense of inner peace. Day 5, Amor Fati, the love of fate. The next day, John decided to tackle one of the more difficult Stoic principles, Amor Fati, or the love of fate. This idea encouraged embracing everything that happened, good or bad, as necessary and meaningful, rather than resisting life's inevitable challenges. John's life had been full of resistance lately. He had resisted the breakup with Rachel, replaying their last conversation in his mind over and over, wishing he had said something different. He had resisted the pressures at work, wishing for an easier path. But Stoicism taught that fate, in all its forms, was something to be accepted and even loved, for it shaped who you became. That morning, John reflected on the setbacks in his life and tried to frame them differently. The breakup had forced him to confront his emotional patterns, to question his dependency on relationships for happiness. The challenges at work had pushed him to grow professionally, to develop resilience and a thicker skin. Even the little annoyances, like missing the bus or spilling coffee, were opportunities to practice patience and acceptance. Throughout the day, John repeated to himself, "Amor fati, love your fate." When something frustrating happened, like a delayed project or an uncooperative coworker, he reminded himself that these events were not obstacles, but opportunities to cultivate strength. Each frustration was a chance to practice patience, to embrace the present rather than wishing for a different reality. By the end of the day, John noticed a subtle yet powerful shift in his mindset. Life didn't feel so heavy anymore. The resistance, the constant wishing for things to be different, had begun to fade. He was learning to flow with life's challenges rather than fight against them. Day 6, Memento Mori, remembering mortality. On the 6th day of his journey, John faced one of the most profound Stoic practices, Memento Mori, the reflection on mortality. This wasn't about being morbid or fearful, but about remembering that life is fleeting, and each day, each moment, is a gift that should be cherished. That morning, John took a walk to the nearby park. As he strolled through the quiet paths, he reflected on the fragility of life. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, leaves falling to the ground in a rhythmic dance with the wind. He thought about how each leaf would eventually decay, returning to the earth, much like all living things. He thought about the people he had lost, moments he had taken for granted, and the countless hours he had spent worrying about things that, in the grand scheme of life, didn't matter. The practice of Memento Mori gave him a sense of clarity. If life was short, then why spend so much time agonizing over the little things? Why hold on to grudges, worry about the future, or regret the past when time was slipping away? Every moment wasted in frustration or fear was a moment he would never get back. For the rest of the day, John made a conscious effort to be present. When he spoke with coworkers, he listened more intently. When he ate his lunch, he savored each bite. That evening, as he sat in his apartment, he didn't dwell on the emptiness of the space. Instead, he appreciated the peace and quiet, the simple act of being alive in that moment. Day 7, Voluntary Discomfort. The final day of John's week-long Stoic experiment brought the practice of voluntary discomfort. The Stoics believed that intentionally embracing discomfort, whether physical or emotional, helped build resilience and gratitude for life's comforts. That morning, John chose to walk to work despite the rain. The cold droplets soaked through his jacket as he trudged down the sidewalk, each step a reminder of the discomfort he had chosen. As he walked, he reflected on the luxuries he often took for granted: a warm car, a hot cup of coffee, a comfortable bed. By embracing discomfort, he was reminded of how fortunate he was to have these things in his life. At work, he extended this practice to emotional discomfort. During a tense meeting, instead of avoiding conflict, he chose to face it head-on, calmly addressing a difficult issue with a colleague. The conversation wasn't easy, but by confronting the discomfort, John felt a sense of empowerment. He had faced the challenge and emerged stronger. By the end of the day, John realized That discomfort, whether physical or emotional, was not something to be feared or avoided. It was a teacher, a guide that revealed what he was capable of enduring. At the end of the week, John sat at his kitchen table, reflecting on the journey he had just undertaken. The Stoic habits had not transformed his life in the way he had expected. There were no dramatic changes, no sudden moments of clarity where everything fell into place. But what he had gained was something far more valuable. A shift in perspective, a sense of inner peace that hadn't been there before. The challenges in his life hadn't disappeared. Work was still stressful, and the pain of the breakup still lingered. But the way he approached these challenges had changed. Instead of feeling overwhelmed by the chaos around him, he felt more grounded, more centered. He had learned to let go of the things he couldn't control, to embrace life's hardships with grace, and to find strength in the moments of discomfort. The most important lesson he had learned was that life is unpredictable and often difficult, but it is also filled with opportunities for growth and self-discovery. The Stoic habits had given him the tools to face life's hardest moments with resilience and calm, to weather the storm without losing himself in it. John looked down at the list of Stoic habits he had written on the first day. Each one had taught him something valuable, but the journey didn't end here. The true power of Stoicism lay not in a week-long experiment, but in the daily practice of these principles. It was a lifelong commitment to living with purpose, integrity, and wisdom. As he closed his journal for the final time that week, John felt a deep sense of gratitude. He had found a way forward, a path that didn't promise to erase life's difficulties, but gave him the strength to navigate them with a calm heart and a clear mind. Call to action. To the reader, John's story serves as a reminder that life's hardest moments will come. There's no avoiding them. But how we face those moments is within our control. The Stoic habits that help John are not reserved for ancient philosophers or self-help gurus. They are simple, practical tools that anyone can adopt. Start small. Reflect each morning. Practice gratitude for what you have. Let go of the things you cannot control. Embrace discomfort, not as a punishment, but as a way to strengthen your mind and spirit. And most importantly, remember that every challenge is an opportunity for growth. Stoicism isn't about perfection or never feeling pain. It's about learning to face life's inevitable hardships with courage and clarity. If you're ready to take control of your life, to find peace amidst the chaos, start practicing these Stoic habits today.